Stop the camera. The request came quietly, almost lost beneath the hum of studio lights and the nervous shifting of crew members who had been on their feet since dawn. No one moved. The director glanced toward the producer. The producer looked at the floor. And in the center of it all stood Bruce Lee, not in a fighting stance, not performing for the lens, but simply watching. A young stuntman lay a few feet away, clutching his ribs, trying not to make a sound. He had insisted he was fine. He had insisted they roll the cameras. He had insisted he could take another hit, because in this industry, hesitation costs you your future. Bruce took one slow step forward. "Turn it off," he repeated, softer this time. "We're not doing this." The assistant director whispered that the budget couldn't handle delays. Someone muttered about schedules. Someone else about reputation. The camera operator hesitated, fingers still hovering over controls. And in that moment, one that would never make headlines, one that would never be scripted, Bruce faced a choice no choreography could prepare him for: protect the illusion or protect a human being in front of him. Before this story goes any further, take a second to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The camera kept rolling. No one realized they were capturing something far more powerful than a fight scene. They were capturing a truth. The studio in Hong Kong had been transformed into a narrow alleyway, complete with painted brick walls and puddles that reflected the harsh white lights overhead. It was the kind of set designed to look dangerous without actually being dangerous. At least, that was the intention. Bruce arrived early, as he always did, moving through his warm-up routine in a quiet corner. His focus was not on the choreography alone, but on the people around him. The grips hauling cables, the extras whispering nervously, the stunt team stretching muscles already pushed beyond reason. He noticed the young stuntman immediately. New face, eager posture, the kind of determination that bordered on desperation. "What's your name?" Bruce asked during a break. "Chun," the young man replied, bowing slightly. "It's an honor to work with you, sir." Bruce smiled faintly. "We're working together." "Chun." "No, sir." Chun nodded, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. He explained that this was his first major production. His family had borrowed money for his travel. If he proved himself here, he could send money home. If he failed, he would return with nothing but apologies. Bruce listened without interruption. He had heard this story before. Different faces, same stakes. When the assistant director called everyone back to positions, Bruce placed a hand briefly on Chen's shoulder. "We tell the story," he said. "We don't sacrifice ourselves for it." Chen nodded, but his eyes said he didn't believe that was an option. The fight sequence was meant to be simple. A flurry of strikes, a dramatic throw into stacked crates, a final fall that would end with Chen hitting a concealed mat. The choreography had been rehearsed. The timing had been measured. The risks had been calculated. But risk, Bruce knew, was never just physical. On the first take, Chen moved half a beat too slow. Bruce adjusted mid-motion, redirecting the strike, so it glanced off Chen's shoulder instead of his jaw. The camera kept rolling. The director shouted for more intensity. "Again!" someone barked. On the second take, Chen overcompensated. He threw himself harder into the crates, splintering wood that was meant to break safely. The sound echoed through the set. A few crew members exchanged uneasy glances. Bruce stepped back. "Check him," he said. Chen waved them off. "I'm fine." His voice cracked. The director rubbed his temples. "We're losing light. Reset." Bruce watched his chin flex his fingers, hiding the tremor. The young man's pride was louder than his pain, and Bruce recognized that sound too. By midday, the air inside the studio had grown heavy, sweat mixed with dust from shattered props. The illusion of the alleyway felt less like a set and more like a trap, tight, hot, and unforgiving. Bruce requested a short break. Officially, it was to adjust the choreography. Unofficially, it was to give Chen time to breathe. They sat on overturned crates near the edge of the set. "You're pushing too hard," Bruce said quietly. Chen stared at his hands. "If I don't, they'll replace me. Or they'll respect you for knowing your limits." Chen shook his head. "Respect doesn't pay my family's debts." The words hung between them. Bruce thought of his own early years. Auditions that led nowhere, roles that demanded more than they offered, the constant pressure to prove he belonged. He understood the fear of disappearing before you were ever seen, but he also understood the cost of pretending to be unbreakable. Strength, Bruce said, is not refusing to fall. It's knowing when to stand differently. Chin didn't respond. The assistant director was already calling them back. The afternoon sequence required a high fall, controlled, rehearsed, and padded beyond what the camera would reveal. Chin was to be thrown against a wall and slide down before collapsing onto the concealed mat. Bruce tested the setup himself. He pressed the mat with his foot. He examined the wall panel. He asked the stunt coordinator twice if the supports were secure. "Yes," came the impatient reply. "We've done this before." Bruce nodded, but unease settled in his chest. When the cameras rolled, the first half of the sequence went smoothly. The strikes landed with precision. The timing aligned. For a brief moment, it looked exactly as planned. Then Chen's foot slipped on the wet concrete. It was subtle, a fraction of a second, but enough. He hit the wall at the wrong angle. The panel shuddered. The concealed mat shifted just out of place. Chen's body struck the floor with a dull, unmistakable sound. Silence flooded the set. Chen tried to sit up and failed. Bruce didn't wait for instructions. He was already moving. "Don't move," Bruce said, kneeling beside him. Chen's face had gone pale beneath the studio makeup. "I'm okay," he whispered, though his breath came in shallow bursts. The director approached, anxiety masked by urgency. "We need to know if he can continue. We're behind schedule." Bruce didn't look up. "He can't." The producer interjected. "We have 1 day left on this location. If we stop now..." Bruce's voice remained calm. "He can't." A medic was called. Crew members hovered, unsure whether to help or stay out of the way. The illusion of the alleyway had dissolved completely. What remained was a young man in pain, and a room full of people calculating the cost of compassion. Chin gripped Bruce's sleeve. "Please," he murmured. "I can do one more take." Bruce met his eyes. "At what price?" Chin didn't answer. The medic confirmed bruised ribs, possibly cracked. Nothing life-threatening. Nothing that would halt production, if one were determined enough to continue. The producer seized on that. "He's cleared," he said. "We can adjust the angle, reduce impact." Bruce stood slowly. "He's not a prop." The words were not loud, but they cut through the room. A few crew members looked away. Others pretended to busy themselves with cables and lights. The unspoken rule of the industry hovered over them. The show must go on. Chin struggled to sit upright. "I need this," he said, voice barely audible. "Please don't take it from me." Bruce hesitated. He understood ambition. He respected sacrifice. But he refused to confuse sacrifice with exploitation. "We will finish the scene," Bruce said finally, "but not like this." The director frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Bruce replied, "we change the story." Rewriting a fight sequence mid-production was unheard of. It meant new camera angles, altered choreography, and the risk of disrupting continuity. It meant time, money, resistance. But Bruce gathered the team and demonstrated a version of the scene that relied on suggestion rather than impact. A shadow crossing a wall, a sound of crates breaking off-screen, a cut to Chin already on the ground. The result implied rather than shown. "It will be more powerful," Bruce said. "The audience's imagination completes what we do not show." The director hesitated. The producer calculated. The crew exchanged looks. And Chin watched, torn between gratitude and guilt. "You're changing it for me?" he said quietly. Bruce shook his head. "I'm changing it because the truth matters more than the illusion." The new sequence rolled just before sunset. The lighting shifted to long shadows that stretched across the set, adding an unexpected depth to the scene. What had once been a straightforward display of force now carried an undercurrent of tension and restraint. Bruce moved with controlled precision, stopping strikes inches short, letting the camera angle create the illusion of contact. The sound team enhanced each movement with carefully timed effects. When Chin fell, it was onto a mat repositioned well outside the frame, his descent guided rather than forced. "Cut," the director called. Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, the crew began to applaud, not for spectacle, not for danger, but for the scene's emotional weight, for the way it suggested violence without glorifying it, for the way it preserved dignity. Chun lay on the mat, staring up at the lights. For the first time that day, his shoulders relaxed. Something had changed. Word of the altered sequence spread quietly through the studio over the following days. Some called it unnecessary. Others called it innovative. A few dismissed it as indulgence. But among the stunt team, the story traveled differently. They spoke of the moment someone had said, "Stop," and meant it. They spoke of a star who had chosen restraint over spectacle. They spoke of the possibility that their safety mattered. Chun returned to set after a day of rest, moving carefully but with renewed confidence. He no longer rushed to prove himself through pain. Instead, he focused on timing, precision, and trust. Bruce noticed the difference. "You stand differently now," he said. Chun nodded. "I thought strength meant enduring anything. Now I think it means knowing what's worth enduring." Bruce smiled. Months later, during post-production, the editor paused on the footage from that day. The shadows, the restraint, the subtlety. It felt different from the rest of the film. Less about domination, more about consequence. "Are we keeping this version?" he asked. The director considered the question. He remembered the tension on set, the arguments about time and money, the quiet resolve in Bruce's voice. "Yes," he said, "we're keeping it." The scene remained, not because it was safer, because it was truer. The film premiered to packed theaters. Audiences gasped, laughed, and leaned forward in their seats. When the alleyway fight appeared, something unexpected happened. The room grew quiet. Viewers leaned into the tension created by what they couldn't fully see. The implied impact felt heavier than any choreographed blow. The aftermath, the stillness, the weight, lingered longer than spectacle ever could. No one knew about Chen's fall. No one knew about the arguments on set. They only felt the authenticity. And sometimes that was enough. Chen attended the premiere in the back row, wearing a borrowed jacket and sitting beside other stunt performers whose names would never appear on posters. When his scene played, he held his breath. Afterward, one of the veterans clapped him on the shoulder. "You made it look real," he said. Chun shook his head. "We made it real." He thought of the moment Bruce had said, "Stop." He thought of the choice to protect rather than exploit. He thought of the quiet shift that had allowed him to return home not as a casualty of ambition, but as someone who had learned to balance it. Years passed. Chun built a steady career, not as a star, but as a respected stunt coordinator known for meticulous planning and an unwavering commitment to safety. He insisted on rehearsals. He insisted on protective measures. He insisted on listening when someone said they were hurt. Some producers called him difficult. Others called him essential. He kept a faded photograph from that film set tucked inside his notebook, a reminder of the day the story changed. Bruce continued to work, teach, and challenge conventions until his untimely passing. Stories about his speed, his skill, and his philosophy spread across continents. Some tales grew exaggerated. Others were simplified into slogans. But among those who had stood on that set, one memory remained unchanged. The moment he chose a person over performance. It was not recorded in interviews. It was not highlighted in documentaries. It lived quietly in the practices of those who had witnessed it. An invisible legacy measured not in box office numbers, but in fewer injuries, safer sets, and a culture that slowly began to question the cost of realism. The footage from that day still exists, tucked within reels of film that captured far more than choreographed combat. It shows a man pausing in the middle of production, not to perfect a strike, but to protect a colleague. It shows a choice that did not make headlines, yet rippled outward through years of unseen decisions. Truth does not always arrive in grand gestures. Sometimes it appears in a quiet refusal to continue, in a hand placed on a shoulder, in a scene rewritten so that no one has to bleed for applause. The world remembers legends for their victories, but the people who stood beside them remember something else, the moments when character mattered more than strength. And maybe that is the most mysterious truth of all, that the greatest impact is often the one the camera almost missed. From which part of the country are you watching this story?